we saw this film, the latest film by Mr. Zanussi. As you noticed, it's exact film for this kind of festival. It has a lot of philosophy, scientific thinking, and of course, the cinema at its finest. So we will talk with Mr. Zanussi. I will start with my first question, and then I will ask you to ask him to share your thinkings, comments, maybe to ask something inspired by this film. So, Mr. Zanussi, we see two main characters in this film who live decent lives, relatively privileged, maybe not being aware or more precisely without need to think about big questions of death, finality, suffering, until they're faced with limit situation, as Karl Jaspers called them, Grenzensituation, like bomb attack, torture, kidnapping. Do you believe that this kind of situation are main triggers for ordinary people to start asking this kind of existential questions?
You know, I have a very long perspective because I'm a dinosaur. I am 84, so it's quite a lot. And I have this tragic experience of Second World War, of communist time, and violence is a natural state of the world. And the last 20 years were very exceptional. They couldn't last more because that doesn't happen in history. Moments of peace and illusion that we're safe is a short-lasting illusion. The rest of the time, people are exposed to violence, to suffering, to injustice, and fight it. So it's no surprise to me that war is back in Europe, because we haven't had a war for some time, but in Balkans you had a war not so long ago. It was also a surprise. We thought, all this is over. It's not over. It may happen anywhere. Now it happens in Ukraine, and tomorrow who knows where some missiles will fall. So unfortunately our life by definition is dramatic. It is drama. Sometimes with optimistic ending, sometimes with bad ending, but it's a natural state of things. It is not exceptional.
And something. No microphone.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the beautiful Bach music. It was wonderful throughout the film. And secondly, there is a saying in Italy, in Italian, so that if somebody or something didn't exist, it should be invented. And I think that we're grateful for your film and that this kind of film exists. I think it was a truly philosophical film. And there was something I noticed at the beginning. It was the first scene, which I would like to ask you about. It is when the main character introduces himself, and as if he was talking to us in the first person. And this reminded me of something Brecht used in his plays, the Phantom's effect, yes.
Right.
So my first question was there something of that? Was this idea important to you? And the second question was, I also found a big difference between your film and what Bergman was trying to do many of his films. And do you find that there was anything that you wanted to add to what he was saying, or say it in a different way?
And they did.
Roberto Resson, and second it was Bergman. Bergman institutionalized authors' cinema.
Buñuel and others occasionally were making author films, and they were making standard films very often to survive, maybe to express themselves. And only Bergman was the first who said, I approach cinema like most writers approach writing. It is just an expression of my view and my experience and my fantasy and imagination. So I think this is behind it. But Bergman gradually was becoming more and more pessimistic, and hope was vanishing from his films. And that's what I regret badly. I knew Bergman personally, but it was only one meeting, and he was not accessible for any discussion about his views. So I couldn't even articulate my question, what happens? Why his optimism is vanishing? Why there is less and less light in his view? If I were totally pessimistic, I wouldn't share it with you. I would keep it for myself, because I think there is enough depression in the world. So if I have no idea what can I offer as a hope, I would rather keep silent. And still I admire Bergman.
Thank you. Anyone else, or maybe we can continue with this spirit, because yeah, Mr. Zanussi is more than 15 years in film, making films, and he collaborated with many important directors, writers, actors, cinematographers.
Directors don't cooperate as a rule, unfortunately, as the conductors don't. I had many friends conductors, and they do not know each other, because they say, how can I conduct with another person in the hall? We're very seldom. I was producing films, and then I was trying to help my colleagues to have their films produced, among others Agnieszka Holland was, I think, thrice I produced her films. But my real background is physics, and I started my studies in the 50s choosing physics, and I'm in love with physics up to now. Unfortunately, physics was never very much in love with me, and I was mediocre. And after a couple of years, 4 years of studying, I realized that I have no chance for Nobel Prize, and nothing less interested me. I wanted to say, well, you know, it is a complex of maybe my generation, because we feel that we are survivors. Others died, others were bombed, and we survived. So it must find some expression, the very fact that I was given life and others were not. And by the way, I show in the film, it's probably unnoticeable at the beginning, that there are such actions all over the world and all over Europe, that you collect money because somebody is unable to pay an operation or buy a very expensive medicine, and you know for sure that the child will die in a couple of months or no, well, months usually, if this medication is not paid. And still we spend money on nonsense, and these things happen. So my protagonist, who gets this money unexpected, gives it also unexpected and says, I have no merit. There is no merit. Money which you get by hard work has some value, but money that falls from sky, it means nothing. But somebody's life may be saved, and that's frightening to me.
Yeah, more precisely, you communicated with a lot of directors, you were friends, you mentioned Tarkovsky, now Bergman, Mikhalkov, people who influenced the modern cinema. And may I ask you who of, not just this mentioned, but because you were friends with a lot of them, who influenced the most in the way that you directed your films?
Well, that's a good question to a critic, but not to me, because I'm not quite aware. And maybe I don't want to admit how much I owe to the others, but because I do owe a lot. But we are all having huge ego, and ego says, that's all you, that's nobody else, which is not true. I know that. In my pre-last film, I had an actor who had a very big ego, and he was very crossed because his camper was smaller than the camper of another actor who was more famous but had a smaller part. It made me furious because it was so difficult to assure them both campers. So I called him and I wanted to reproach him. But he said, no, I know what you mean. My camper is big enough for me, but it's not big enough to contain my ego.
Thank you. Anyone who would like to? Yes? Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Може вие, да.
What advice would you give to young filmmakers who are aspiring filmmakers who want to be in making films, directing, and writing?
Well, you know, I'm giving this kind of advices every day, and I'm afraid they are not very precious because advice is not enough. You have to work together, and maybe sometimes you transfer some experience to the others. I believe that it is enormous effort to be faithful to yourself, to be true, not to pretend, not to imitate, because the world is offering you endless models of making career and expressing yourself, but all these models belong to the others. None of them is yours. You have to find your own way, and this your way will be different from any other way. Otherwise, it will be worthless. So I insist on truth. I think this is one of the ideals. It's the same as beauty, but accentuating truth in art is some kind of perversion, because today it is fashionable to be postmodern and question the very existence of truth. And I think we ruin our culture if we admit that there is no truth, that everything is relative and anybody has his own truth. No, truth is one. As I believe beauty is one, and this is provocative, I can say that, I hope you won't denounce me, but if you have Latin proverb, de gustibus non disputantum, it doesn't mean that every has a different taste. It means you have taste or you don't have it. It's a big difference. If you don't see that El Greco was a great painter, don't talk about painting. Don't tell me this is your taste. If you don't understand how great Mozart or Bach were, you're deaf. Talk about something else. And this relativism is very destructive, because we may argue about details, about preferences. We like something more and something less. We are more bound to the classic or more bound to the romantic. But basically, you may develop your taste. Taste is something that you work on, you study, you have contact with work of art, and you develop sensitivity. That's important. But don't tell me it is all relative, because then we are falling into chaos.
Thank you. Bojan?
Previously you said that the chaos is like a normal.
No, but chaos is
We have to fight it. Otherwise, chaos can consume us. Chaos is a beast that is ready to destroy society and the individual. Sorry? I didn't get it. No, but we are doing all our effort to make ourselves better human beings, to make society better society, and to make world better world. But the power of evil is enormous, and we underestimate it. Our time of comfort made people not vigilant enough, not noticing that evil is somewhat crawling and approaching us all the time. I made my previous film about it. It was very criticized because I try to say that evil is not a simple absence of goodness. Evil is a dynamic power. I don't know anything more about it, but in all religions there is some reference to the dynamic power of evil, and we try to forget it.
Victor?
I hope you can hear me from here.
Yes, fantastic.
Okay.
I think that it will be a longer question. I didn't have time to read your interview until just a few hours ago, the interview that you gave to the Philosophical Film Festival. And I was pretty happy with one of your answers concerning the relationship between science and the arts, because you mentioned that you were more competent to judge some of these questions compared to other humanists, because you have some scientific background. And I like that very much, because I really think that the arts are stuck in some 19th century, even 18th century questions. There you mentioned Feuerbach, Nietzsche, etc., etc. And you say that modern science has really allowed us to have a different view on many of these questions and topics. And indeed, really, I feel like science has allowed us to think, to understand that some things that we believed were metaphors, like the flowing of time, as you showed in the movie, that we believe are real or just metaphors, that reality doesn't work that way, and the other way around, that some things that we believe are definite metaphors, like many worlds, etc., can be real. Well, therein lies my question, because you mentioned quantum physics, and you employed there the Hugh Everett's many worlds hypothesis, and you hint at that. But don't you think that both the question that you're grappling with in the movie, the existence of God, because you mentioned Dostoevsky, is a remnant of a past thing, and that some of the answers that you're trying to hint at are really interpretations, scientific interpretations, that still allow us to use some of that deterministic materialism that we may have felt that we've done with, because that many worlds hypothesis still allows for a deterministic materialistic explanation of reality, but in many different worlds. And in many ways, quantum theory leaves many, because it's still just something that we're trying to get the end of it, leaves many things still uncertain enough, so that we find some answers in, like that Hamlet's quote.
I'm very happy that you're absolutely in tune with my thoughts. And I remember that I think he was my compatriot, I'm not sure of that, Copernicus, his invention, together with Galileo and the others, was absorbed by general public after 300 years, because it is evident that this theory is apparently wrong. You go out at the morning and you see that sun is rising, and in the evening it is fading. So it means that sun runs around the world, around the earth. And now Copernicus says, no, it doesn't. Nonsense. We see, we have eyes, we know that sun is turning around us. And suddenly physics, astronomy tells us, no, this is wrong. So it takes 300 years so that now most people in most countries accept the idea that even if it looks wrong, it is true that the earth is turning around sun and not opposite way around. So if it took so much time, I think we are now in Newton era. In our common life, in everyday life, we don't admit that this is an illusion, that this materialistic reality is only part of reality, but there is far more behind. And that's fascinating. And that time that we perceive in a certain way, that's Immanuel Kant who said, our perception of time is something attached to us, but it's not objective. Maybe time for somebody runs in opposite direction. Maybe future is present in contemporaneity. I had this phrase in my film Illumination many years ago, and the communist censorship wanted it to be cut because they thought it is idealistic. They were right, but unfortunately, I argued enough, and using Einstein and others' views, I finally defended this provocative line. But why not? Maybe future already exists, and so on and so on. But this is not absorbed by our culture. We think still in this old-fashioned schemes of Engels, of Feuerbach, of Nietzsche and the others. And just some time ago, I'm still traveling with this film quite a lot, and somebody asked me if I consider myself conservative. I said, well, if you want to call me conservative, why not? It doesn't matter to me. But I think you are conservative because you believe in Engels, and this is old-fashioned to me. So we compete. Who is progressive? I believe I am, and he believes he is. History will judge. By the way, I got from the audience in one of my meetings an anecdote, which I will bring you. I wonder if it is funny in my translation into English. It is about Einstein, who died. He's confronted with Godfather, and God recognizes him, and Einstein asks a question. May I know now what is the formula of the universe? God says, okay, opens some curtain. There is a long formula written. Einstein is reading it and says, excuse me, but here is a mistake. And God says, yes, indeed.
Okay. Имам уште некој... Да, Повелјана.
Yeah.
First of all, let me thank you very much for this wonderful and very philosophically inspiring movie. So I'm quite in a dilemma or polylemma which question to raise because I think that there were so many philosophical references, explicit or implicit, that it's really difficult to choose between them. I'm not quite sure whether all of them were intentional or not, so we can maybe discuss a bit about it. For example, you mentioned in the beginning this reference to relation to some of the ideas of Leibniz ideas, etc. Maybe I will leave it for the the end of this comment. But I wanted first to ask you whether some Pythagorean references were explicitly present in your approach, because this relationship between mathematics, between mathematical patterns, and between the aesthetics dimension of these harmonical structures is one of the most basic principles of Pythagorean thought. And the idea of the number as an ontological principle that manifests itself not only in abstract forms and relationship, but produces by itself aesthetical effects. Also in the music, and the Bach music, and I think that it is not by chance that it is combined with all of these ideas. So my first question would be whether this, and also the relationship between the mathematical, the aesthetical, and the mystical aspects present in Pythagorean thought, which maybe, at least to my mind, maybe refer to this instinctive search for an integral picture of world, transcending this division of scientific and artistic and practical, economical aspects of this implicit schizophrenical division of the integrality of the aspects of our life. So just...
Well, Pythagoras was integrating
yes,
these aspects.
yes,
And you know, in this animation that you see on the screen, you have reference to the division of, which is the golden division, and that it is aesthetics and mathematics at the same time. I think we forget about it too much, so I tried to revive this idea. Thank you that you pointed out. It is there, and Bach, especially for clavier, the temperate clavier, is one of the most mathematical compositions I've ever met. So I thought it is appropriate to my film. By the way, I was recording it because the film is also co-produced by Italy, and it's just to my colleagues, if they are present, that sometimes in co-production, even such a small participation, minoritarian, like recording music, is something that saved this production. We couldn't afford it anyway, otherwise. And I think the recording is a very high quality, done on a very small provincial Italian city. This is also a miracle of our days, that in a small provincial city you may have a European level execution of classical music. So it was there, and they contributed as much as Israel did for a moment.
Okay, thank you, Anna. You have another question? No. Yasmina?
No, first. Thank you for your presence here, Mr. Zanussi. We are really enjoying, at least I'm enjoying your presence here. I wanted to ask you something about your background in philosophy. You said about your background in physics, but also in philosophy, I read in your interview. We had lots of directors here that weren't philosophers, they were filmmakers. And many of them, when they were sit there where you are, were very, I would say they wanted to make a distance from our philosophical questions. Mainly because they haven't really thought about their philosophical stance that they are saying in their films. So many of them were doing philosophy, but they didn't explicitly define their philosophical stance. But you do. So I wanted to ask you about how much your philosophical background did much for your filmmaking, or maybe it made pretty much wrong or didn't help you at all in your philosophy, doing philosophy in your films?
I think, generally speaking, my philosophical studies that lasted only 3 years, but they helped me in life, but not in art, because it's another channel. And I have to divide my expression. When I write an essay, I try to refer to my philosophical experience. But when I write a script, I must not even understand what I'm writing, because if I understand, I kill the intuition. And this is the substance of narrative in creation. So it is a trap. When you are very articulate, then you don't need to be an artist. You just write, and people often ask me for some kind of short wisdom. I offer them SMS. If I can send an SMS, why to write a book? That's enough. So, but well, let me tell you something about my studies, because that's something what makes a difference. I was brought up and spent all my youth in Poland. And when Krzysztof came to power, there was a certain liberalization, and we had some old professors back to their chairs at universities. And in Krakow, there was the only one university, state-run university in communist country, when we had non-Marxist philosophy. We have a regular philosophy, like anybody in Germany or Italy at that time. It was due to the professor of great esteem, Husserl's pupil, Mr. Ingarden, Professor Ingarden, and because of his position, authority says, oh, there are so few philosophers, let us have some who study erroneous philosophy. That means non-Marxist. What was amazing that the professor had to tolerate a group of Marxists who were teaching on other departments, like medicine, like engineering. You had to have always some Marxist classes. So professor has divided university building and had two entrances, one for philosophers, one for Marxists.
Thank you. I think we have time only for another question. So, okay, two questions. And because in 9 o'clock we have to start the screening of the next film. So, please. He will ask on Polish.
Well, this far I understand.
Panie Zanussi, chciałem pana zapytać, no więcej tak konkretnie o filmie. Jest jedna taka sentencja w filmie. Zrozumiałem, że nie musi być Boga, aby istniał. Z pana widzenia, prywatne doświadczenie w życiu, czy pan znajduje się takie skrzyżowanie, w którym myśli, że jeżeli Bóg istnieje, to dobrze. Jeżeli nie, to może naprawdę jest dobrze, żeby jakoś istniał w jakiejś formie. I moje pytanie jest bardzo proste, trochę osobiste. Dlaczego pan nagrał ten film?
All right, if you say it in Bulgarian.
Ja teraz to przetłumaczę w języku macedońskim.
In Macedonian, that would be more appropriate.
Proszę, gospodin Zanussi, има една реченица във филма, която вели не мора Бог да биде, за да постои. От неговото животно изкуство ме интересираше, така има се наоѓа на некоја разкрсница, која што се прашува, ако постои Бог, добро, да. Ако не постои, тогаш може би и треба да постои во некоја форма. Моето прашање е многу едноставно и може би и лично за него, а това е зашто го снимил овој.
Well, so this sentence is a quote of Pascal. And it is apparently empty, and intuitively we understand it exists. It is saying that existence of God does not depend on us. It is not a psychological creature that we create, creation. It is reality or it is not. And of course, most of my life, I consider myself a believer. That means I have a conviction that there is somebody beyond material universe. But of course, I'm not sure 100%. And even if I feel sure At the evening, I lose this illusion in the morning, and everything starts from the beginning. That's natural human condition. We are full of doubts, and who has no doubts has no faith, in my opinion. So this unconditional belief is fanatism, is something what I'm afraid. And I know that in the name of God, so much violence, so much injustice was implemented. So we sometimes prefer to use philosophical term instead of saying God, saying, for example, mystery, because God is mystery for us. And that's another way of putting it. But I made this film because I'm old, so I'm going to face this reality sooner than most of you, and I have to be conscious of it. However, I love life as it is, and I'm very happy that I am still breathing and meeting people and doing things. So you ask me, why did I make this film? To confront something what is unavoidable, and to think about it, and to think about what is success in life, because my older protagonist is apparently successive, but apparently because in fact he is not, because he didn't achieve something what is made to me the quintessential for a human being. It is love. If you don't love, you don't live. That's my conviction.
Czy to oznacza, że ten główny aktor w filmie jest pan?
Well, that was once asked French writer Flaubert about Madame Bovary. Who is she? And Flaubert answered immediately, that's me. So all the characters in my films are me, more or less.
Yes, just one last question.
Yes, thank you for the film. I enjoyed it. Question is, which question do you think has more significance in terms of moral consequences? Whether the question, is there a God? Or the question, is reality entirely deterministic? Because if there's a God, the whole thing about sin is there and responsibility. But if there's determinism, then everything is predetermined, so it's very questionable whether the concept of sin is objectively true and real and significant. So if both exist, then don't they collide?
They do collide, and I don't believe in deterministic vision of the world. This is, to me, 19th century. And as science has abandoned this vision, I think in our life we should abandon it. We have a certain field of freedom, and we are responsible how we administrate this freedom. If not, life is senseless. And if I hear this determinism, especially common among psychologists, who tell me why I am what I am, forgetting that I have made some choices and my profile is formed by my choices, by my past choices. And if I have no freedom, life has no sense. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Naples. It is, sorry for a totally private confession. I directed in theater quite a lot, but mostly outside of Poland. And I directed a play of my friend in Italy. And this play was presented in the biggest prison of Italy in Naples, 3,000 prisoners. And the play is about responsibility and love. But then I spoke to people whose life is determined by the verdicts, which are very high. Some of them are supposed to be in prison for 40 years. And I still wonder how these people use their freedom. and what is the consequence. It was heartbreaking for me. I spent many, many hours talking with them because they wanted to talk, but they admit that the outside world doesn't exist to them anymore because the verdict is so long that they will never be back to the outside world. They want to create inner world to be able to survive and find sense in life, even if this life is so severe and so limited. Sorry, that was my private confession.
Okay.
Can I ask one last question?
Okay.
Do you personally prefer Wojtyła's theological view to Pope Francis's or vice versa?
Well, I don't think you can really counterposition because the current Pope is not very theologically oriented, and he wrote very few texts and very ambiguous. So I think this is different. I think Benedict wrote some very interesting things, but unfortunately Benedict was not oriented towards science. And Wojtyła wrote encyclica Fides et Ratio, which is maybe not his best from theological point of view. It is rather conventional, but the whole impact of Christianity, which is not willing to be a religion of the past, but says there is no collision with science and scientific world and metaphysical vision. They are compatible. I think that was a very important statement, and this is what I liked in teaching of Wojtyła. I think he had a couple of seminars about contemporary physics, contemporary astronomy, and his deep belief was that there is no conflict, no collision, that this collision is 19th century and not contemporary.
Okay, thank you for this great conversation. Thank you to the audience for the input. And I hope to see again Mr. Zanussi. This is the second time that he is in Skopje, so why don't he visit us again?